High-speed rail is a very mainstream, widespread technology in use in countries all around the world. And in the US, this is a project without precedent in American history. We've never built a from-scratch high-speed rail line. So the first project is always the hardest. And then from there, it gets easier, it gets cheaper, it gets more efficient. But I think it also should be a sign of encouragement that it can be done, but historically, high-speed rail in the US has been a long and tortured saga. It goes back decades. California was at the forefront of actually breaking ground and getting started. In 2008, voters approved a $33 billion plan to construct a high-speed rail line connecting San Francisco and Los Angeles. Ever since then, it's been slow going and a challenging journey. The funding that voters approved, an $8 billion bond to cover part of that $33 billion price tag, was never enough to actually build the line, and the cost estimates kept going up to now over $100 billion. I think the conversation with California high-speed rail, as with so many things in American society, there's a very polarized conversation. I'm Benjamin Schneider. I'm a freelance journalist based in New York. I previously worked in San Francisco, where I covered California high-speed rail for the San Francisco Examiner, and have covered it also as a freelancer for other publications. I tend to write about urban planning and public policy issues. Transportation is one of my favorite subjects to cover. California high-speed rail is, a subject that I've been excited to follow over the years. States like California, Texas, and Florida have been talking about building high-speed rail networks for a very long time. High-speed rail has been in discussion for decades. Jerry Brown, when he was governor back in the 1970s, famously visited Japan and rode the Shinkansen bullet train there and loved it. And he thought, why can't we do this in California? The idea was kind of floating around for a while. There were a lot of studies and reports, but it didn't really go anywhere until 2008, when the state government put forward a ballot measure that the people voted on to authorize a bond to start paying for one chunk of the money that would be needed to build a high-speed rail line between San Francisco and LA. And I think at the time and throughout this whole process, there's been this sense that traffic in California is famously horrible. The airports in the Bay Area and Southern California are hemmed in by the ocean or the bay or development, so that you can't expand airports. There need to be other options for people to get around the state, and high-speed rail is the solution that many other countries have landed on, but actually executing that vision has just been a lot harder than anyone hoped. The whole thing has just taken a really long time, much longer than planned, and cost much more. Right now, the project is in a really challenging place. Construction is underway between Merced and Bakersfield in the Central Valley. These are two mid-sized cities in the middle of California that are between San Francisco and LA, and that was where the project began construction. Meanwhile, it faced a lot of environmental lawsuits and eminent domain challenges as the line started construction in the Central Valley. Just that portion alone, through the Central Valley between Bakersfield and Merced, is the only part that's currently under construction, and that line is still years away from completion and many billions of dollars behind budget. This was thought to be an easier place to build because it's relatively flat ground and it's not going through huge cities like LA and San Francisco, but nonetheless, it has been really hard. There's still been a lot of big structures they need to build to cross over roads and railroad tracks. There have been a lot of disputes with landowners there that don't want to sell their land to the High-Speed Rail Authority. There's a $3 billion federal grant that would come close to filling a good deal of the budget gap that the Trump administration is now seeking to pull back.
It's been 17 years and $16 billion, and no rail has been built.
And so in the meantime, there's a new CEO at the High-Speed Rail Authority that basically wants to get more of the project kind of under the state's own control and be less dependent on the whims of a federal government that hasn't historically been very friendly to this project.
And we are proud to be at the forefront of this transformation in transportation.
The new CEO, he came in the summer of last year and started working on a new plan to fund this project. And that plan is basically this. They want to partner with private sector investors to finance this project using state revenues over a very long period of time as sort of a backstop guarantee for those investors to earn a return on their investment. And with that money, the project could then extend beyond its current route in the Central Valley and get to the edge of the Bay Area and the edge of the LA area, where riders could then connect to regional rail systems. Basically, this vision is to get closer to what voters had initially approved and what people in California have long dreamed of having, a system that really links San Francisco and LA.
We have some breaking news. Just in moments ago, President Trump saying that he is ending government funding for California's high-speed rail project.
Honestly, I don't think the federal situation affects this project all that much. There is this one $3 billion grant, which is meaningful, but in the scheme of a $100 billion project, it's not going to make or break the whole thing. As much as anything, it's a cultural problem and a political and a media problem for the project. The more that President Trump criticizes it, or Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy criticizes the project, the more national media are inclined to write negative articles about the project. And it sort of creates this cycle of, negative publicity and potentially policy ideas coming from Republicans to try to derail the project. So in that sense, it's really bad. But I think those headlines sort of gloss over this more complex funding and local political situation in California, where there is, in fact, a notion of a plan to push this project forward to something closer to what voters actually want there. The project continues to earn about $1 billion a year in revenue from the state's cap and trade program, this environmental program where polluters basically pay into a fund where that money then goes to projects like California High-Speed Rail. Governor Newsom in California has said he wants to extend that program and actually increase California High-Speed Rail's share of the money there. So that is one pretty solid source of revenue going forward for the project. I think it's probably not enough to really achieve its goals, but it's a pretty solid starting place. Brightline has been a really interesting counterexample or foil almost to the California High-Speed Rail project. And we have to be careful because this Brightline West project connecting Las Vegas and Southern California has not broken ground yet. It's still very early days, but it is apparently close. They're planning to break ground at some point this year. But so far, all indications are that it's just going to be a much smoother process and a less expensive and less uncertain process than what California High-Speed Rail is doing. The way I understand it, the biggest reason is that they're building this project almost exclusively within the right-of-way of Interstate 15, the very congested highway that goes between Las Vegas and Southern California. And that way, they're avoiding all of these eminent domain lawsuits, they're avoiding environmental challenges. This is an already disrupted, already carved out corridor that they can just run their trains alongside and avoid a lot of these problems that California High-Speed Rail has had. And Brightline West seems more in a more solid position to execute on what it has planned. It is getting the majority of its money from private investors, but it's also the beneficiary of another $3 billion federal grant. And this one, the Trump administration is not looking to pull back. They've said, we support this project. The grant should go through, as well as these things called private activity bonds, which are basically low interest loans that the states of California and Nevada have offered to the project. I think it's important to be real on all levels about what's actually going on there. I think a lot of the media coverage doesn't even acknowledge that the project is under construction, that there are plans to extend it beyond the Central Valley. It's not purely supposed to end there. So I think it's important to be transparent about what is actually happening. But I think by the same token, it's important to acknowledge all of the ways that the project has gone wrong and show that the path to completing it is very difficult. This is not an easy road ahead by any stretch of the imagination. Very often you hear people saying it's just a total waste of money, it's never going to happen, it should be stopped immediately. On the other side of it, you have people who kind of will defend the project completely and not acknowledge any flaws with it. For those of us in the media who are trying to characterize it fairly, you've got to kind of find the middle ground there. I have a book coming out in October. It's called The Unfinished Metropolis, Igniting the City Building Revolution. And it's about how the built environment of American cities has stagnated and how cities can evolve to help solve some of our biggest societal challenges. So it's basically a tour of American cities showing all the things that have gone wrong and how things can evolve to actually solve some of the biggest problems that we face.